Hello and welcome to the Wish You Knew podcast. I'm your host, Karen Bortfett. Thank you so much for tuning in again this week. Today, as some of you may know, is National Coming Out Day. It's a day that is celebrated by the LGBTQI community as a day when people who hold a sexuality on that spectrum can share that with the world. The holiday has been around since 1988, and it was started with the idea that intolerance exists because of silence. And so the idea that people, if they share their sexuality, it sort of brings it out of the shadows, and that increases awareness and tolerance in the world. So that's my summary of the event. Today we have a good friend of mine on the show. His name is James, and he identifies as a gay man, and he will be sharing a little bit with us about his coming out experience and some of the experiences he has had as a gay man. James, thank you so much for being with us today on the Wish You Knew podcast. We are very excited to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So as I mentioned, today we're talking about what it's like to be gay in honor of Coming Out Day, which is today. We are very excited to have your insights into that. If you've listened to the show before, you know that I have a list of questions for you, some of which are questions I came up with, and others are from listeners or are questions that have come up when talking with listeners. So we'll just go through those questions to learn more about your story and your experience.
Sounds good.
Let's go back to the beginning. That seems like a great place to start anything. At what age did you realize you were gay, and what was that experience like for you?
It's kind of more of a linear path as you come to realize more and more over life. At the place where I am now, retrospectively, I would say 8 years old. There were instances of looking back and seeing myself in certain situations and being more attracted to men and a male figure than to females. But I would say more consciously of realizing that I was gay was starting at puberty and growing from there. And then really fully recognizing my sexuality for myself at the end of high school and beginning of college.
What was the coming out process like for you? Sort of realizing and acknowledging that to sharing that with others.
Yeah, I mean, it was really tough because I grew up in Southern Ohio in a very conservative area, in a very conservative school. So I definitely had to hide attractions. I had a couple of girlfriends in high school who are still two of my best friends today, which is beautiful. Every time that I would have a homosexual experience at that time in middle school and high school, I would end up crying the next day or crying afterwards, praying, God, I can't be gay, this can't happen. And then also making a commitment to myself personally that to prove that I'm not gay, I would lose my virginity to a woman. And that would end all notion that I was a homosexual. But when I got to Marquette, I ended up starting off Marquette knowing nobody. I was the first person even to apply to Marquette from my high school. And we went on this Christian leadership retreat before orientation freshman year started. And I met some really, really awesome people there and really awesome Catholics there and people my age who were Catholic, which I had never really experienced before because I went to a evangelical Christian Protestant high school. Through that refinding for myself of my Catholic identity and spirituality, I started going to Mass every single day. Through prayer, it led me to a place of peace and a place of wholeness and truth within my own life. And this sexual orientation and sexual identity wasn't concurrent with being and trying to pass it off as nothing, as I am 100% a straight man, blah, 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 blah. wasn't concurrent with this peace that I was finding in the rest of my life. So I wanted to make peace with my own self was the main reason for coming out of the closet and be wholly authentic with my own self and with my own identity moving forward.
You mentioned as a child or as a teenager struggling when you had, I think you said, a homosexual experience. Did you talk to anybody about that at the time, or was it just something that you kept to yourself?
No. Yeah, something I completely kept to myself. It was something shameful. It was something that was completely anti the entire society around me. I didn't have a outlet of anybody, it seemed, to really be comfortable enough in this aspect to talk about my own self. That being said, I also was an out liberal at my high school because of my own struggles and my own what's happening in the background of my life. In the foreground, I was still a big voice of dissension against this conservative society I was growing up around and surrounded by, and also a challenger to all these perceptions, not only about sexuality, but about the war in Iraq, about Christian servant leadership and being in solidarity with the poor, and actually doing service rather than charity. So it was all these politics and moralities and spirituality were very, very mixed and molded together.
Who was the first person you told verbally expressed, I am gay, to?
One of my best friends from high school in freshman year of college, when I was home for Thanksgiving, and we were just hanging out. Yeah, so I told him, so that would have been November. And then at Marquette, the second person that would have been February of freshman year.
I think with any group that is outside of the majority, shall we say, there's often a confusion as to what language should you use. Do you say gay? Do you say homosexual? Do you say LGBTQ? Can you talk to me a little bit about vocabulary?
Yeah, and vocabulary is very important. Let's start with homosexual. Homosexual is, to me, it's very scientific and biological, and I find it to be used in a study and in academic journals where I want to be known as my individual person. I'd rather not be seemingly brushed off as somebody to study. So homosexual persons, people with same-sex attraction, those are very clinical in a way. I'm a gay man, and from the best of my knowledge and my experiences, a lesbian woman, transgender individual, a bisexual person. Those terms specifically are most accepted by the LGBTQ community. Another thing about it is, what is the acronym? You could, in day-to-day dialogue, if you really wanted to, say LGBTQIA over and over and over again. But that's a tongue twister, and that's really difficult. So if you're just speaking and you're talking about the LGBT community or LGBTQ community, that's fine. But if you are writing and you want to be inclusive as possible, you can write LGBTQ, you can write LGBTQ+. The plus sign stands for additional letters within the acronym, or LGBTQIA. L for lesbian, G for gay, B for bisexual, T for transgender, Q for queer and or questioning, I for intersex peoples, and A for allies, because everybody likes an ally.
I think most of those are probably understood. Intersex is the one that might not be as commonly discussed. Can you explain what that is?
So intersex individuals, again, it's similar to using homosexual as opposed to gay, or as gay as opposed to homosexual. Intersex people are people who were born with male and female genitalia. In the science community, in biological terms, you can say hermaphroditic. The intersex community has accepted that term for themselves. What they're calling for is the individual be able to choose their own life path without a doctor and or their parents making the decision at birth for them. Because doctors and parents would see actually a individual has more masculine genitalia than feminine genitalia or vice versa, and they would make the decision based on that to do a gender correction surgery on the infant. So what the intersex community is calling for is stopping that gender correction surgery because it can lead to, and it has led to, what if the doctor and parents chose wrong and then the wrong gender, and rather have that child and that individual decide for themselves how they want to live their own life. As an intersex person, if they wanted a gender surgery later on in life, that is now their full decision to make. Germany in 2013, I believe, it wasn't too long ago, has now put on their birth certificates the option of third sex to include this population. On a birth certificate, it doesn't only say the boxes male and female. The parents can choose if they would like to raise their child third sex.
So for all of those listening, you've probably also noticed, as I have, James, you have a lot of very specific knowledge. Do you work in this field, or why is it that you have such a deep understanding of these issues?
I work in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and I now am a anti-human trafficking researcher and analyst and project consultant. But before, I was working a lot with the LGBT community and specifically more with transgendered sex workers here in Phnom Penh. Through that work, and I've always been associated with a Catholic organization. So through that work, I also learned that there's a lot of education and a lot of hurt between the two communities that needed to be rectified. So I started hosting dialogues between the LGBT community and the Christian communities in Phnom Penh, and then also just doing general education at university classes, at NGOs, hosting workshops so that people hopefully can walk away with a better understanding of who is this community, what are some of the issues that they face here in Cambodia, internationally, and critically think, how can we all as human beings together be with each other and more knowledgeable, not against each other or separate.
When you're working with religious groups, I know there are many times I've heard Bible verses or different things quoted as reasons why being gay is wrong or unnatural, or a decision that has been impacted by the devil, society, or I don't know what. You've heard many of these various things as well, I'm sure. What is your response to that, or how do you work within that paradigm and with people who were brought up with that belief? How do you start to have someone understand a perspective when they're holding something out like the Bible or years and years of dogma and tradition?
I think this is why, one of the main reasons why the LGBTQ community is so hurt by the Christian community. And I'm going to specifically talk about the Christian community because that's my experience mainly. Within the Christian community, when they throw a Romans Bible verse, a Leviticus at somebody or at a group of people, they're just pigeonholing this individual. They're not seeing beyond words on a page. They're not seeing the light within that individual as well. So what I've been calling for in these dialogues, we have a list of definition, we have a list of rules before that is established before these dialogues take place and right at the beginning of these dialogues, is that we're not going to talk about